Disney is very good at making you believe that everything has always been exactly the way it is. The castle was always there. The rides were always those rides. But behind the polished magic lies a graveyard of canceled roller coasters, half-built resorts, and entire countries that almost existed. Here are 13 abandoned Disney World projects you've never heard of. Number 13, the Western River Expedition. Before Disney World opened in 1971, Imagineers assumed that Florida guests wouldn't care about pirates. Pirates were a Disneyland thing, a California thing, and Florida already had enough pirate lore baked into its own history and coastline. So instead of transplanting Pirates of the Caribbean east, they designed something entirely original, the Western River Expedition. The plan was a massive boat ride through the American West. Think cowboys, outlaws, dramatic Red Canyon scenery, tumbleweeds, and all the animatronic frontier chaos that the Disney Imagineering department could cook up. It was being designed by Mark Davis, one of Disney's legendary 9 old men, the same creative force behind the original Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion. The attraction was well into development when the park opened, and it was not a casual sketch. It had detailed storyboards, concept art, and even a preview display in the park's future attractions center. Then guests arrived and immediately complained that there was no Pirates of the Caribbean. What was supposed to be a deliberate creative decision on Disney's part, giving Florida its own original adventure instead of a copy, turned out to be wildly unpopular with actual visitors. Disney management reversed course, built a shorter version of Pirates for the Magic Kingdom, and the budget earmarked for the Western River Expedition quietly disappeared, along with any mention of it in future park literature. The land set aside for it eventually became home to Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which ironically evolved from a mine train coaster that was originally planned as a smaller companion ride within the Western River Expedition complex. The animatronics built for the ride weren't entirely wasted. Some ended up repurposed inside Epcot's Living with the Land attraction, where they quietly still exist today, if you know what you're looking at. Number 12. Beastly Kingdom, Animal Kingdom's Missing Land. When Animal Kingdom opened in April 1998, guests wandered through Africa, Asia, and Dino Land, USA, and most didn't notice that something was conspicuously absent. Look at the original Animal Kingdom logo. Right there in the swirling design is a dragon. That dragon was not decorative. It was not some vague artistic flourish. It was a placeholder and a promise for a land called Beastly Kingdom that was supposed to be one of Animal Kingdom's defining headline attractions. Beastly Kingdom was designed to celebrate mythical and legendary creatures, the animals that never existed, but that humans have been imagining for thousands of years. The land was to be divided into 2 halves, a good side and an evil side, a contrast that gave Imagineers room to build 2 very different aesthetic worlds within the same area. The good side would have featured a Fantasia-themed boat ride called Fantasia Gardens, taking guests through scenes with Pegasi, fawns, and centaurs from the 1940 film, as well as a maze called Quest of the Unicorn, where guests searched for the mythical creature through an enchanted forest setting. The evil side would have featured Dragon's Tower, a roller coaster set inside a ruined castle where guests teamed up with a colony of bats to outsmart a fire-breathing dragon. There was also to be a restaurant called Loch Ness Landing and a small mythical sea creature-themed area. Budget constraints pushed Beastly Kingdom out of Animal Kingdom's opening and into a second phase of development, a fate that in Disney's world often means permanent death. Euro Disney's financial troubles in the early 1990s had already strained the company's capital for ambitious projects, and Animal Kingdom's own attendance coming in below projections in its early years sealed Beastly Kingdom's fate. The proposed site was converted first into Camp Mini Mickey, and then, years later, into Pandora, the world of Avatar. The dragon in the park's logo is still there, though, which in a strange way is more than most canceled Disney projects ever got. Number 11. The Epcot Equatorial Africa Pavilion. When Epcot opened in October 1982, World Showcase launched with 9 countries and a bold promise: more were coming. 3 pavilions were advertised in Epcot books and promotional materials as coming soon: Spain, Israel, and Equatorial Africa. Of the 3, Equatorial Africa had by far the most developed plans of any World Showcase pavilion that was never built. This was not an early-stage concept. It was promoted as an imminent arrival. The pavilion was designed to represent the cultures, landscapes, and wildlife of Central Africa, an ambitious regional concept covering countries along the equator, including Kenya, Cameroon, and what was then Zaire. Rather than representing a single nation, it would have captured a broader African identity, which also meant the financing model was more complex than a typical pavilion. Disney brought in Alex Haley, the author of Roots, as an advisor and narrator, a collaboration that gave the project genuine cultural credibility. Haley appeared on television during Epcot's 1982 opening celebration alongside Danny Kaye, describing the pavilion's vision to a national audience as though its construction was only a matter of time. The plans were detailed and imaginative. A 60-foot treehouse at the pavilion's center would let guests climb up and look down at a projected image of animals gathering at a waterhole at dusk. A live outdoor stage show called Heartbeat of Africa would feature African musicians and dancers. A Circle Vision 360-degree film narrated by Haley would take guests across African landscapes and wildlife scenes. The proposed location was between China and Germany, a spot that to this day remains a modest snack stand called the African Outpost, which Disney opened in 1983 as a temporary placeholder. That temporary placeholder is still standing today, 4+ decades later, still occupying the footprint where a 60-foot treehouse was supposed to rise. Number 10. The Epcot Iran Pavilion. This one comes with context that makes it genuinely strange to think about. In the late 1970s, before Epcot had even opened, the Shah of Iran was reportedly in discussions about funding a Persian-themed pavilion for World Showcase. The proposed Iran Pavilion would have been genuinely ambitious, a dark ride exploring different eras of Persian history, taking guests through ancient Persia, the medieval Islamic Golden Age, and into the modern era, paired with a bazaar-style shopping plaza modeled on a traditional Iranian marketplace with Persian arts, crafts, and food. Persian architecture, with its geometric tilework and dramatic vaulted spaces, would have been visually extraordinary in World Showcase. Then came 1979, the Iranian Revolution, and the overthrow of the Shah. The political situation in Iran transformed completely and overnight, and whatever formal or informal conversations had been happening between Disney and Iranian representatives ended with finality. There was also a parallel proposal, separate but connected, involving the Shah potentially funding a Persian-themed resort hotel near the Seven Seas Lagoon at Walt Disney World. That plan died at exactly the same moment for exactly the same reason. A Disney-designed showcase of Persian culture with Iranian government funding in the current geopolitical climate is the kind of counterfactual that requires some imagination to even picture. Disney has never revisited the concept, and there is no obvious sign that it is on anyone's planning agenda. Number 9. The Epcot Israel Pavilion. The Israel Pavilion was actually advertised on billboards when Epcot first opened in 1982, which puts it in a small and unfortunate category, openly promoted and officially planned attractions that simply never appeared. The design would have recreated elements of ancient Jerusalem, a central courtyard anchored by a menorah, buildings drawing from both Old and New Jerusalem architecture, an outdoor amphitheater hosting classical and folk music performances, and an open-air restaurant surrounded by olive and cypress trees. The landmark was to be a recreation of Jerusalem's distinctive skyline elements, giving the pavilion an immediately recognizable visual identity. The pavilion was eventually abandoned due to a combination of budget shortfalls and security considerations. An Israeli pavilion in a high-traffic American theme park raised practical questions about the safety and security infrastructure that would need to accompany it. Questions that Disney was not positioned to resolve with its standard park security protocols of the era, and that nobody seemed able to answer in a way that made the pavilion financially viable to build and operate. Budget problems on the Phase 2 front added a second layer of difficulty. Israel did eventually receive a brief presence at Walt Disney World as part of the Millennium Village experience at Epcot during the 1999 to 2000 Millennium Celebration, but that was a temporary installation, not the permanent pavilion that had been advertised to the public at Epcot's opening. Number 8. The Epcot Spain Pavilion. Spain was another advertised pavilion that never appeared, and its story has the particular frustration of a project that seemed genuinely close to happening. A Disney press release from the early 1980s formally announced Spain as having joined Epcot's World Showcase Community of Nations, and a contract was reportedly signed for a Phase 2 design. This was not a casual rumor. Spain was publicly committed to and promoted alongside other coming additions. The pavilion design would have blended elements of Barcelona and Madrid, and the planned Land attractions included a boat ride through Spanish history and heritage, a film focused on Spanish vacation destinations, a traditional marketplace, and a waterside tapas restaurant. On paper, it was a thoroughly realized concept. A World Showcase Phase 2 was discussed seriously throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, with Spain consistently positioned as one of the first editions. The financial model that Epcot depended on required national governments or major corporations to sponsor each pavilion, essentially paying for the privilege of being represented. That model worked for the countries that opened with the park in 1982, and for Morocco in 1984 and Norway in 1988. But as the original Epcot's corporate sponsorship framework became more difficult to sustain and Disney's own financial priorities shifted, the funding for Phase 2 never materialized. Spain dropped off marketing materials, then off park maps, then out of public statements entirely. No formal cancellation was ever announced. The pavilion simply stopped being mentioned, which is Disney's preferred method of not building something they once said they definitely would. Number 7. Muppet Land at Disney MGM Studios. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Disney and Jim Henson were in active discussions about building a full Muppet-themed land at what was then Disney MGM Studios. The concept went well beyond a single attraction. There would have been an entire dedicated area of the park, Muppet Studios, with multiple rides, shows, and immersive character experiences themed around Kermit, Miss Piggy, Gonzo, Fozzie Bear, and the full ensemble. One of the proposed centerpieces was a Muppet-themed version of the Great Movie Ride, reimagining iconic Hollywood film scenes with Muppets playing every role. The concept art was reportedly spectacular. Then, Jim Henson died unexpectedly in May 1990 at just 53 years old. The full land concept collapsed almost immediately after his death. Without Henson as a creative partner and advocate for the project, the ambition behind Muppet Studios deflated and the plans were scaled back to a single attraction. What Disney eventually got was Muppet Vision 3D, which opened in 1991, a genuinely excellent attraction. Cleverly designed and loaded with Henson-era character, but a far cry from the immersive themed land that had been on the drawing board. Disney's relationship with the Muppets then became legally complicated for years, as the Henson estate and various parties negotiated ownership. Disney didn't officially acquire the Muppets franchise until 2004, 14 years after Henson's death. Muppet Vision 3D ran at Hollywood Studios until 2022, when it finally closed to make way for a new Muppets presence. The Muppets are currently getting their most significant Disney World treatment yet, with a full re-theme of Rock and Roller Coaster on Sunset Boulevard. That's a long way from a full-themed land, but it's more than Muppet fans at Disney World have had for a while, better late than never, by about 30 years. Number 6. Fire Mountain at Magic Kingdom. Fire Mountain was a proposed volcanic roller coaster that would have been built at Magic Kingdom, likely in or near the Frontierland area, sometime during the late 1980s and early 1990s. The concept envisioned a massive erupting volcano as the visual centerpiece of the entire attraction, something so dramatic and towering that it would have reshaped the park's skyline from multiple vantage points. The coaster would have run inside and around the volcano structure, incorporating fire effects, steam bursts, lava visuals, and the kind of thematic immersion that Disney could deliver when the budget was fully behind a project. Disney Imagineers developed concept art for Fire Mountain, and the idea made it to internal presentations with enough detail to suggest it was taken seriously as a candidate for construction. But the years following Euro Disney's troubled 1992 opening were financially lean ones for Disney parks globally, and ambitious new thrill attractions at Walt Disney World became a harder argument to make when the company was managing losses across the Atlantic. Fire Mountain was quietly shelved, along with a number of other expansion ideas from that era. Space Mountain already anchored the Tomorrowland coaster experience, which also reduced the internal urgency for a second major high-speed ride. The volcano never erupted. The concept never resurfaced in any recognizable form at Walt Disney World, and it remains one of those projects that exists almost entirely in Imagineering circles and among dedicated Disney history enthusiasts. Number 5. Discovery Island's Abandoned Future. Most people who visited Walt Disney World in the 1980s or 1990s remember Discovery Island, a small zoological park on Bay Lake, just off the Magic Kingdom resort area, featuring exotic birds, reptiles, and other wildlife displayed in a lush, tropical island setting. It was genuinely charming, and intentionally low-key, a deliberate contrast to the sensory overload of the main parks. It opened in 1974 under the name Treasure Island and operated for 25 years before Disney quietly closed it in April 1999. The official reason was that Animal Kingdom, which opened in 1998 with far more expansive wildlife exhibits and experiences, had made Discovery Island redundant. What's less discussed is that Disney had floated multiple ideas for the island's future before the decision was made to simply walk away. Proposals at various points included converting it into an evening destination for adults with dining and entertainment, folding it into a resort-to-resort water taxi network that would give it renewed foot traffic, and repurposing it as a private retreat available to guests staying at premium resort hotels. None of those concepts ever made it past the discussion stage, and Disney never publicly committed to any plan for the property. The island has sat completely abandoned since 1999, locked to the public, but visible from the water taxis that pass nearby. Florida's climate does not wait for renovation budgets, and urban explorers who have sneaked onto the island over the years have documented decaying infrastructure, rusted animal enclosures, old buildings slowly disappearing under vines, and the eerie stillness of a place that was once full of visitors and is now full of nothing. Disney owns the island outright, has never disclosed concrete plans for its future, and as of today, it remains one of the most genuinely strange abandoned sites in the possession of any entertainment company in the world. Number 4. Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge. In November 2018, Disney formally announced a new deluxe villa resort called Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge, to be built on Bay Lake between Wilderness Lodge and Fort Wilderness Resort, on the site of the former River Country Water Park. The concept art that Disney released was genuinely stunning, a nature-inspired design woven through with imagery from Disney's classic animated films set in the natural world. Pocahontas, Brother Bear, and The Fox and the Hound. The rooms would carry that theme into every visual detail. One journalist who visited Walt Disney Imagineering headquarters while the project was in active development described what the Imagineers showed his tour group as unlike anything you've ever seen, if the best parts don't get cut. That qualifier turned out to be the important part. The Fort Wilderness Pavilion, which had hosted the long-running Mickey's Backyard BBQ outdoor character dining experience for years, was closed permanently in December 2018, specifically to clear the site for Reflections construction. That was not a small thing. Mickey's Backyard BBQ was a beloved, old-school Disney World institution, and its permanent closure felt like a significant sacrifice for a project that seemed fully committed. Groundwork and excavation began in early 2020, with construction machinery visible on site. Then, the pandemic arrived in March 2020, construction stopped, and by the time Walt Disney World reopened in the summer of that year, all references to Reflections had quietly disappeared from Disney's website, digital press releases, and planning materials. Disney eventually confirmed only that the project was being reassessed. Years later, it was rebranded entirely as Disney Lakeshore Lodge, occupying the same footprint but under a different design direction. Projected for 2027, Mickey's Backyard BBQ never returned. Number 3, the Epcot Play Pavilion. The Wonders of Life Pavilion at Epcot had been sitting dark since 2004, used only occasionally for private corporate events, which is a polite way of saying it was essentially a ghost building in the middle of the park. In 2019, Disney announced an ambitious and genuinely interesting replacement, the Play Pavilion, described as an interactive futuristic city where guests could engage with Disney characters through technology-driven games and interactive experiences. The details that were announced made it sound unlike anything else in any Disney park. Planned features included an Animation Academy-style experience hosted by Edna Mode from The Incredibles, a hotel heist interactive game where guests would work alongside Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde from Zootopia, an arcade, a monorail Mark 10 experience, and a water balloon fight video game featuring an assortment of Disney characters. The whole concept was built around active participation rather than passive observation, guests as players, not just spectators. Disney began prep work, and the Play Pavilion was included on Epcot park maps and featured prominently in promotional materials for the park's broader reimagining. The project appeared to be moving forward with real momentum heading into 2020. Then, the pandemic arrived, work paused across virtually every Disney Parks project, and unlike most of those other projects, Play Pavilion never came back. In 2023, Disney confirmed only that the concept was being re-evaluated. The parks division's preferred vocabulary for a cancellation they'd rather not formally announce. The building was quietly removed from park guide maps. Today, the Wonders of Life Pavilion structure stands empty between two of Epcot's biggest current attractions, Guardians of the Galaxy, Cosmic Rewind, and Mission Space. Millions of guests walk past it on both sides every year, most completely unaware that a full interactive world was once planned for the space inside it. It is currently used occasionally for private corporate events. Exactly what it was used for before the play, Pavilion was announced, full circle and not in a satisfying way. Number 2, Disney's America, the History Theme Park. This is arguably the most audacious canceled project in Disney's history. In 1993, during the height of the so-called Disney Decade, a period of aggressive parks expansion under CEO Michael Eisner, the company announced a plan to build a history-themed park in Prince William County, Virginia, about 35 miles from Washington, D.C. Disney's America would have featured lands transporting guests to pivotal moments in American history, arriving at Ellis Island as an immigrant, experiencing the Civil War firsthand, visiting a Native American village, exploring a steel mill town, and navigating a Civil War-era spy adventure. The scale was comparable to Epcot, a full-size theme park built entirely around American history. The opposition was immediate and fierce. Historians, preservationists, and civic leaders objected loudly to Disney building an entertainment complex near the Manassas Civil War battlefield, a site of genuine, solemn historical significance where thousands of men died. The critics' central argument was pointed. This was the same company that had softened every fairy tale it had ever touched, and American history, slavery, genocide, war, immigration, was not material that could be softened without serious consequences. Protests grew throughout 1994. An organized demonstration of nearly 3,000 people marched in September of that year. The historian David McCullough, whose word carried considerable weight on matters of American heritage, publicly criticized the project in terms that made headlines. Disney canceled the project less than 2 weeks after that September 1994 protest, citing the controversy as the deciding factor. The company suggested it might find a less controversial location for the concept, but it never did. Some attraction ideas originally developed for Disney's America, including early versions of Soarin' and Grizzly River Run, eventually found their way into Disney California Adventure when it opened in 2001. The history park itself remained entirely on paper, which, depending on your view of how Disney handles serious subjects, is either a genuine loss or a narrow escape. Number 1. The Epcot Soviet Union Pavilion. Of all the World Showcase pavilions that were designed and never built, the planned Soviet Union Pavilion might be the most surreal to contemplate, if only because of the timing involved. In the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Disney was actively developing plans for a Russian-themed pavilion as part of the perpetually discussed but never funded Phase 2 expansion of World Showcase. The design concept was centered on a replica of St. Basil's Cathedral as its visual anchor, one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. A structure whose onion domes and vivid colors would have made an immediately striking addition to the World Showcase promenade. The pavilion was intended to represent the Soviet Union as a nation. The Soviet Union then collapsed in 1991. What makes this story almost darkly comedic is that Disney didn't immediately drop the concept. The Russian-themed pavilion continued to appear in internal planning discussions for several years after the USSR ceased to exist as a political entity, simply reframed as a Russia pavilion rather than a Soviet one, as if the name change was the primary adjustment required. The Phase 2 expansion itself never received funding, which was the deeper problem. World Showcase expansion required a national government or major corporate sponsor to finance a pavilion, and the chaos of post-Soviet Russia in the early 1990s was not a moment when anyone was writing large checks to Disney for cultural representation at a Florida theme park. A Russia pavilion still appears regularly on lists of what Disney fans want most for World Showcase. The architectural appeal of St. Basil's Cathedral, the rich cultural material available in Russian art, music, and history, on paper, it is an obvious candidate. In practice, given the current state of global geopolitics, The conversation about when a Russia pavilion might happen is not one that appears to be progressing toward any near-term answer. Disney has never been shy about dreaming big. The Imagineers who filled sketchbooks with roller coasters inside volcanoes, tree houses overlooking African wildlife, and dark rides through Persian palaces weren't being naive. They were doing exactly the job they were hired to do. The money, the politics, the corporate crises in Paris and New Jersey, the pandemics, the deaths of creative partners, the geopolitical revolutions, and the simple, brutal unpredictability of the world are what intervened between the sketch and the construction crane. Most of these projects didn't fail because they were bad ideas. Many of them were genuinely inspired. They failed because great ideas and difficult circumstances have a way of meeting, and the circumstances don't always lose. What ended up in the parks across 50-plus years of Walt Disney World's history is extraordinary by any reasonable standard. What didn't end up there is its own kind of remarkable, a parallel Disney World that exists only in concept art, planning documents, fan archives, and the quietly persistent silhouette of a dragon in an Animal Kingdom logo. If you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe. There's plenty more Disney history, forgotten projects, and stories that didn't make the brochure where this came from.